In this video, I will walk through the process of scoring an ethics bowl round. An ethics bowl round is broken into two halves, each focusing on a distinct case. Each team will be the main presenter during one of these halves. Team A is the main presenter in the first half, and Team B is the main presenter in the second half. So now let's pretend that Team A is ready to present. What is the judge's responsibility? We'll start with the presentation. The presentation is the first category that judges score. This category is broken into three components, and each of these three components is worth up to 5 points for a total of up to 15. The first component asks the judges to mark the clarity and systematicity of Team A's presentation. What you're looking for here is whether the presentation is easy to follow, whether it maintains a coherent line of thought throughout, whether the team explains any important ethical concepts or theories that it invokes, and, crucially, whether the presentation addresses the question that the team is tasked with answering. Sometimes teams come in having already prepared a presentation on a case and they present it, despite it not quite addressing the question. Be sure that the team addresses the question. A good presentation is clear, systematic, thorough, and on topic. The second component asks the judges to mark whether Team A identified and thoroughly discussed the central moral dimensions of the case. Obviously, Team A only has 5 minutes to present, so a judge needs to balance breadth and depth when awarding points here. If Team A rattles off a bunch of moral issues raised by a case without explaining any of them, then that would be grounds for a lower score. Similarly, if Team A only discusses one moral dimension of the case, that would be grounds for a lower score. A good presentation needs thoroughly to discuss any moral issues it raises, and it also needs to demonstrate sensitivity to the variety of issues that ethics bowl cases raise. The third component asks the judges to mark whether Team A considers and addresses viewpoints that differ from the one it defends in its presentation. This component intersects with the second. Considering opposing views is a way of demonstrating awareness and appreciation of the central moral dimensions of the case. But the key here is that the team demonstrates appreciation of the fact that its own position is not the only game in town. Considering and rejecting an especially weak counterargument does not demonstrate appreciation of the complexity of the issue. It only demonstrates a desire to give the team's own argument the veneer of strength. A good presentation should identify objections to the position that the team defends, or else explain why the team rejects arguments for opposing perspectives. When judging each of these components, be sure to keep in mind that the presentation is only 5 minutes long, so a judge should not expect the kind of depth that we might expect from, for example, an hour-long presentation. But at the same time, it is the team's responsibility to make sure that it fulfills each of these components. Probably the most common mistake that teams make is not addressing alternative viewpoints, so be especially attentive to that. A 3 or a 4 is a good default score for each of these components. By default, I mean it's the place to start. If a team underperforms your expectations, you can move the score down. If the team overperforms your expectations, you can move the score up. It doesn't matter whether your default is a 3 or a 4. The raw score is less important than that each judge scores consistently. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the commentary section. So now that Team A has presented and judges have marked their scores, Team B will have an opportunity to comment on Team A's presentation. Team B can earn up to 10 points for its commentary. The overall goal of Team B's commentary should be to carry on the discussion of the main question of the case with Team A. That means that Team B needs to do a number of things. First, it needs to focus its commentary on Team A's presentation. The commentary section is not an opportunity for Team B to present its own view of the case without engaging with Team A's presentation. The commentary needs to engage with Team A's presentation. Of course, presenting an alternative perspective for Team A to consider can be a way of engaging the presentation, but Team B should make sure to explain why Team A's presentation would have been improved by discussing the alternative perspective. Second, Team B needs to make sure that it is not simply peppering Team A with questions. One problem with this strategy is that teams who use it rarely explain the significance of the questions to the other team's presentation. A second problem is that it creates an impossible task for the other team in the response to commentary. Team A can't respond to 15 questions in only a few minutes. In this way, peppering the other team with questions is not in the spirit of constructive dialogue. Third, and I've hinted at this already, Team B needs to explain the significance of each point it makes to Team A's presentation. Finally, it is worth remembering that this is the ethics bowl. Just as Team A's presentation should focus on the ethical issues relevant to the question, Team B's commentary should focus on the ethical issues raised by Team A's presentation. Corrections of minor errors of fact, unless these errors have ethical significance, are not appropriate parts of a commentary. A good commentary is clear, on topic, and focuses on just a few points for the other team to consider. Finally, let me note that Team B need not disagree with Team A's position. Those who agree with one another can still have a productive discussion about an issue. Judges should pay attention to whether Team B moves the conversation forward in an appropriate way. A 7 or an 8 is a good default score for a commentary. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the response to commentary. Once Team B presents its commentary, Team A will have the opportunity to respond. Team A can earn up to 10 points for its response to commentary. Just as Team B's commentary needs to focus on Team A's presentation, Team A's response to commentary needs to focus on Team B's commentary. Team A is under no obligation to respond to every single point that Team B raises, but Team A should do its best to focus its response to commentary on the most significant points that Team B raises. Suppose, for example, that Team B raises one significant objection to Team A's presentation and then makes 3 or 4 smaller points. If Team A's response to commentary focuses entirely on the 3 or 4 smaller points and ignores the most significant objection, that would be grounds for a lower score. But failure to respond to every point that Team B makes is not, in general, grounds for a lower score. A 7 or an 8 is a good default score for a response to commentary. All right, now I'm going to talk briefly about the judges Q&A, and you should see our independent video on the judges Q&A for more detail. Once Team A is done responding to Team B's commentary, the round moves to a Q&A session between Team A and the judges. Team A can earn up to 20 points for its responses to judges' questions. In this section, each judge will have the opportunity to ask one question and a short follow-up question, and potentially additional questions, time permitting. This is the section of the round in which judges bear the most responsibility. A judge's question should be reasonably brief to make sure that each judge has enough time to ask a question, should be clear, should be addressed to the team as a whole and not to individual members of the team, and should challenge the team to think more deeply about the moral dimensions of the case than came out in their presentation and the subsequent discussion. Typical judges' questions invite the team to discuss some relevant ethical issue that didn't come up in the prior discussion, or challenge some part of the team's argument, or invite the team to clarify their position when it is unclear. Things like that. Coming up with a good question can be difficult, especially if the team makes a good presentation. For that reason, it's a good idea to have some generic questions in your back pocket. For example, what do you think is the strongest counter-argument to your position and why? Or, your team's argument hinges on value X. Can you say a bit more about what precisely you mean by value X? Judges should know what they are going to ask before the Q&A begins so that they can listen to the questions and responses rather than sit there thinking up a question. When scoring the team's response to questions, judges should focus on a few things. First, is the team actually responding to the question? Second, is the team responding in a clear and plausible way? Third, is the team demonstrating appreciation for the perspective that the question raises, or is the team merely digging in its heels? It is important to keep in mind here that the team is allowed to change its position. either in response to judges' questions or in response to commentary from the other team. A good ethics bowl round is about productive discussion, not defending a position to the death. Finally, let me note one generic thing about scoring. Your job as a judge isn't to judge a team on the basis of how much you agree with its position. Your job is to judge how clearly and cogently the team defends its position, and, if applicable, how well the team adjusts its position in light of criticism. A 15 or a 16 is a good default score for judges' Q&A. After the judges' Q&A, the teams switch roles and discuss a different case. Team B makes the initial presentation, Team A provides commentary, Team B responds to commentary, and then Team B responds to questions from the judges. All right, now let me talk about the final category of the score, respectful dialogue. So the final piece of the total score is a score for respectful dialogue. Teams can earn up to 5 points, and the default score here should be a 5. In general, teams shouldn't lose points for respectful dialogue unless they are rude in some way. Many teams will bend over backwards to make a show of respectful dialogue. They will profusely thank the other team and the judges for participating in the ethics bowl and compliment the other team on their commentary and so on. Teams are not required to do any of this in order to get a perfect score for respectful dialogue. So that's how scoring the ethics bowl works. In all cases, the driving value behind scoring is the value of thoughtful and productive discussion. Teams who advance that value by being especially clear and cogent, by showing sensitivity to alternative positions, by actively listening and responding to the other team and the judges, etc., should score well.